Other speakers today are going to deal with the immediate situation in Ukraine war. I would therefore like to look at the fundamental underlying issues that must be dealt with to end the war. These are not recent views. From 1992 to 2000, I lived in Moscow. Already then, for reasons that will be explained, I stated that provocative actions of NATO would create, for deep historical reasons, a war in Ukraine. One of the subsidiary reasons that sections of the peace movement in the West failed to understand the war when it broke out was that they had not studied the history of the Ukrainian state and blithely talked of the Ukraine without understanding the real historical situation of that state. Turning to the most recent events, new statements by Trump and US Defense Secretary Hegseth about ending the Ukraine war, if adhered to, would address one of the two crucial issues at the war's root, ruling out Ukraine's NATO membership. I say if adhered to because Hegseth tried to talk them back a bit, but Trump must know if Ukrainian membership of NATO is not ruled out, the war will not end. So for the sake of what follows, I will assume that Ukraine's NATO membership is excluded. If NATO had taken this stance before February 2022, war would have been avoided and hundreds of thousands of lives saved. However, NATO's refusal to clarify its position led to two issues becoming intertwined: NATO membership and the national question within the Ukrainian state. Grasping that Ukraine, as established in 1991, was a binational state is fundamental to understanding the situation. Those who have studied Ukraine's history know this. Borders resembling post-1991 Ukraine emerged only after World Wars I and II. Before that, the area was divided between a Russian-speaking east, part of Russia, and a Ukrainian-speaking west, part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Poland at different times. Crimea, part of Russia since 1783, was administratively transferred to Ukraine by Khrushchev in 1954, a change that was insignificant within the centralized USSR. Due to this history, East and West Ukraine were divided by language, religion, and history. There is therefore a national question within Ukraine, with nearly 30% of the population being Russian-speaking, as found by the 2001 census, primarily in the east and southeast, and a Ukrainian-speaking majority in the west. It is possible to maintain unity in bilingual binational states. Belgium is an example of such a small state in Europe, and Canada is a large one in North America. However, acknowledging the national democratic and linguistic rights of the large minority is a precondition to maintain their unity. In Canada, unity is maintained through strict bilingual policies, where all signage, legal systems, commercial transactions, and government operations are bilingual, even where there are no English or French speakers in a particular region. Despite this, Canadian unity has only been narrowly upheld in two referendums, with Quebec voting against independence by only 45,000 votes in the 1995 one, with only 50.6% against independence. Without a bilingual policy, or if there had been discrimination against the French-speaking population, or policies adopted unacceptable to them, Quebec would have voted for independence. In Ukraine, until 2014, there was no serious movement to split the state, as the language and other rights of the large Russian minority were guaranteed, and no fundamentally unacceptable policy was pursued. However, after the 2014 overthrow of the elected Yanukovych government, the Kiev administration pursued policies to eliminate Russian language rights and use military terror against the Russian-speaking population in East Ukraine, including the May 2014 Odessa massacre and prolonged shelling in the Donetsk region. The Council of Europe's Venice Commission, which cannot be accused of pro-Russian, noted that, and I quote, "The current law on national minorities is far from providing adequate guarantees for the protection of minorities. Many other provisions which restrict the use of minority languages have already been enforced since 16 July 2019. Such policies inevitably destroyed the unity of the bilingual, binational Ukrainian state." NATO membership intersected with Ukraine's linguistic national division. Russia repeatedly stated that Ukraine's NATO membership was a red line. The US should understand why. During the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, it refused to accept Soviet missiles in Cuba and was willing to go to any length, if necessary nuclear war, to prevent it. The distance from Havana to Washington is 1,100 miles, 1,800 kilometers, only a few minutes flight time for a missile, making defense impossible. But Kiev to Moscow is only 470 miles, 750 kilometers, less than half the distance from Havana to Washington. Ukraine is also a traditional route for conventional military attacks on Russia, seen in the 1941 Nazi invasion and 1942 campaign culminating in the Battle of Stalingrad. The US therefore demanded that Russia accept military conditions which the US made clear it would use any means, including war, to stop if applied to itself. This policy of NATO membership of Ukraine was obviously not supported by the Russian speaking population in Ukraine. NATO's eastern expansion violated US promises to Russia during the German reunification that NATO would not expand an inch eastwards. Numerous US experts on Eastern Europe warned against NATO expansion, particularly into Ukraine. Most famously, George Kennan, the original architect of US Cold War policy, predicted in 1997 that, and again I quote, expanding NATO membership would be the most fateful error of American policy in the entire post-Cold War era. Kennan's prediction was unfortunately regarding Europe turned out to be tragically true. However, US administrations ignored these warnings, insisted on eastward NATO expansion. These overlapping issues, Ukraine's NATO membership and the rights of the large Russian-speaking minority, created the crisis. Regarding the internal situation in Ukraine, it could in theory either be resolved by ensuring full linguistic and other rights for the Russian-speaking minority within the old Ukrainian state's borders, but which Kiev refused after 2014, or the breakup of the Ukrainian state. The latter partially occurred in 2014, leading to localized warfare in Donbass. Angela Merkel admitted that the West never intended to implement the 2014-2015 Minsk agreements, leading to full-scale war in 2022, with the Russian military, with the war following basically the linguistic national divide within Ukraine. Following this post-2014 experience with the Kiev regime, which broke up the binational character of the state and created the war, in practical terms, it's clear that the Russian-speaking population in the east of Ukraine will not anymore agree to remain within the Ukrainian state. To end the war, two issues must therefore be resolved. No NATO enlargement into Ukraine, as agreed by Trump-Hexeth, which the US must be held to. Second, recognition of minority language rights across Ukraine, and because this is by far the largest issue, in particular the Russian-speaking minority in East and Southeast Ukraine. This includes the right of self-determination of the Russian-speaking minority regarding whether they any longer wish to remain within the Ukrainian state as created in 1991. The peace negotiations will only be successful if both issues are settled. Thank you very much.